And welcome back. My final guest is Howard Hellman, who's the chairman of our Business and Economic Development Committee. Welcome, Howard.
Thank you, George. I'm glad I could be here with you this morning.
So, Howard, you're a wonderful community advocate and partner. You are the president and owner of Albright Electric and a number of other business entities. And you've got some really significant experience in that area, which really led to the natural progression of asking you to be not just a member, but the chairman of our Business and Economic Development Committee that I and the town board put together a couple of years ago, and you did some great work on that. Before we get to the Business Economic Development Committee, maybe just talk a little bit about yourself, just so our residents are familiar a little bit. You're a Rockland County boy, born and bred, and maybe you could speak a little bit just about your background, your business experience, and then we can pivot right into Business Economic Development Report as well.
Sure. Thank you for allowing me to do that. I was, as you said, born and bred in Rockland. I'm actually a third-generation Rockland Countyite, born in Spring Valley. Moved to Clarkstown, spent a good number of years residing in Clarkstown, and now, as you know, my businesses are in the town of Clarkstown. We're right along the New York State Thruway. People say we're across the street from the mall. I say the mall is across the street from us. And we really love being in Clarkstown. It just offers so many things for our employees in terms of places to sleep, to eat, to reside. It's a great quality of life here. We look to grow and to continue to stay in Rockland County, and Clarkstown is clearly my home, and I look to help Clarkstown grow in any way I can.
And I do have to, I know you're fairly humble about it, but you're also very involved, have been involved with a number of not-for-profits and do an awful lot of work in that area and support a lot of our chambers and business endeavors, as well as the many not-for-profits that are here. So I do want to recognize that as well. You've been involved on a lot of boards, and it's really a credit to you as a person for the things that you've been involved with in our community.
Thank you.
So what I'd like to do is pivot to the Business and Economic Development Committee. And maybe we could talk a little bit about the report that was done, just in general, and then one of the topics that's on everybody's mind is the Palisades Mall, and we can kind of segue into that from the report. So maybe you could just talk a little bit about the Business and Economic Development Committee, some of the efforts that took place, and maybe some of the, what happened with the report and some of the general findings.
Sure. The committee was formed probably about a year and a half ago, and my compliments to you, George, for picking a very eclectic group of people from different types of businesses, predominantly in the town of Clarkstown, but you also had the foresight to pick some people that are outside the town of Clarkstown, so we could get some thoughts and opinions from outside looking in rather than from inside looking out. And everybody came to the table with the exact same mission, and that is, how can Clarkstown better itself economically? And clearly, the better the town does economically, the stronger it is financially, the less tax burden it is for the people that live here. Thus, the more people will want to live here because the cost of living will be lower than living in other places. So that kind of set out the goal. So we looked at anything and everything from the retail businesses to the professional businesses to not-for-profit businesses, and we kind of put all those in a big bucket, if you will, and shook it up and saw what came out and came up with a couple of suggestions and recommendations for the town, everything from marketing the town on a regional and national level, all of the things it has to offer, to hiring a part-time or full-time economic development person, which I think you did adopt that policy and now have someone in place to do that. We looked, probably the elephant in the room, if you will, was the Palisades Center Mall, as the Palisades Center Mall is the largest retailer in Rockland and also, I believe, the largest employer in Rockland County, and also the largest taxpayer in the town of Clarkstown, certainly, and for the county, I believe it throws off $20+ million of sales tax revenue. So we were very concerned about the future of the mall, which probably segues into where are we at with the referendum? What does the referendum mean? What are the pluses and the minuses of having this referendum taken away, or the referendum that was put in place, the covenant to have that taken away? And it was just about unanimous from everyone on the committee that that clearly is a step that needs to be taken to help the mall continue to grow, to thrive, and to even survive. And with COVID-19, now more than ever, they need this little shot in the arm so they can continue to survive.
Sure. So let's give a little information so the residents can be familiar. So Palisades Mall was first proposed in the 1980s. Took a number of years. Eventually, they went through the land use process in the early 1990s, and the mall required the acquisition of several roads that the town had owned. And so the town agreed to sell the roads to the mall. I think it was Virginia Street, Besser Street, I forget the last street. And two of the streets actually became part of the land area where the mall is. So the mall bought these roads from the town, but at the time, in order to build the mall to the size that it is, the town imposed a requirement, which is called a restrictive covenant, or in legal terms, it's known as what's called a negative easement. So it's a restrictive covenant which said the mall can be this big and have the footprint that was finally done, and if they're going to do anything different there, they would have to go to the people, and the people would have to lift the restrictive covenant. So we went through a process and it had been back and forth with the town board, and we understood that it's really not legally within the purview of the town board to just lift the covenant. We put it before the people. So what the town board did earlier this year was actually vote to lift the restrictive covenant, subject to a positive vote of the people this coming November, on November 3rd. So when people go into the voting booth, where they're voting absentee, however they're going to be voting in November, early voting, there will be a question on the ballot and we'll put the question up so people can see it, but the question on the ballot will say, should the town, or shall the town of Clarkstown lift the restrictive covenant on the Palisades Mall, essentially. And what that would enable is the mall would be able then to move forward with it, with a plan to potentially redevelop, change their footprint. Maybe you could speak a little bit to what would happen if the people vote to lift the restrictive covenant.
Well, the main thing, George, is there is space on the 4th floor of that mall. And I'm sure everybody who's watching today has probably been in that mall. Right. And if you go to the 4th floor and you take a walk down to the ice skating ring, to the eastern side of the mall, you'll notice that there's just walls, there's no stores. And the reason is because that's an area that was built that, as per this covenant, cannot be built in. So by lifting the restrictive covenant, the mall will now be allowed to build in that space. Right. So that accomplishes a couple of things for the mall. One is the ceilings on the 4th floor are substantially higher than on other floors. So then they can attract more entertainment venues that need these higher ceilings. Secondly, with more rentable square footage and having more tenants will attract more tenants. They also will be in a better position with their ability to finance or refinance their properties to make improvements, because now the property will be worth more because there's more value in that space that now has to remain vacant. Right. Additionally, they'll be able to apply for, through the planning board and the whole processes of doing some small additional building in comparison with the size of the mall. And looking at malls in other part of the country, particularly as close as Paramus. If you look at that mall, that's one of the most successful malls in the country. And why is it so successful? Because it keeps reinventing itself. It keeps doing things to attract people. And you need to change with the times. And the traditional retail, as most people know, isn't flourishing, is taking a different direction, and the mall is looking to be proactive and try to stay up with the times and do what the consumers want, and that's more entertainment, maybe even some mixed residential in the area, so it has a little bit of a downtown flavor.
Right, and I think you hit a very key point there, because the reality is whatever happens here, if come November 3rd in just over a month, depending from the taping of this, if the referendum passes and the covenant is extinguished, then it doesn't mean that the mall can go in tomorrow and start swinging hammers. They have to go through the process with the planning board on the use of the additional space and whatever else they might do. And just as we had earlier on this show, we have Joe Farkas from Metropolitan Realty Associates, who's talking about the redevelopment at Macy's. And it's kind of interesting because that's a great parallel and a great way to kind of look at it. The Nanuet Mall for very many years was the kind of the only game in town. And they expanded and they reinvented themselves numerous times from when they were built in the late '60s up until about 6 years ago, 7 years ago, when they had their newest version of the shops at Nanuet. And what did they do? They had to reinvent themselves. They had to, eventually they had additional anchor stores, they had a parking deck there, it was a whole different model. And the shops at Nanuet, Simon, which owns the majority of that site, did a full redevelopment. And now they didn't have a restrictive covenant because when they developed, they didn't acquire any town property and the town didn't impose that requirement. So there's a legal requirement, but in order for the shops at Nanuet to redevelop the way in which they did, they had to go through the full planning process, and it took record time. It happened very quickly. It would be the same thing with the Palisades Mall. They would have to come into the planning board and move forward. And if they wanted to do something slightly different, reconfigure walls or do anything that's outside of the current footprint, aside from the space upstairs, they can't do that now with the restrictive covenant. So it's really, it was the position of the Business and Economic Development Committee to make the recommendation near unanimously, I believe, to say that the restrictive covenant should be lifted, and the
That's
town has
correct.
gone through that process. So what do you think the economic benefits would be ultimately for the residents of Rockland, the residents of Clarkstown, by having the restrictive covenant lifted?
So there's that question, and then there's the other question, if the restrictive covenant isn't lifted. I would be more concerned with the latter.
Okay.
If that restrictive covenant isn't lifted, combined with COVID-19, as I alluded to earlier, that will put that mall into a very, very difficult place to survive as a business. And if that mall can't survive as a business, that will be devastating, certainly first to the town, but to the entire county. Devastating, because the tax base, what they provide for a tax base, what they provide to young people for employees as employment opportunity, and other people for employment opportunity. And that cascading effect, it's incredible. So it needs to pass, and it needs to pass so they can continue to thrive, to get a second bite at the apple, recreate themselves in this very, very difficult environment. And ultimately, it's a win-win. It's a win-win. It's a win for them. It's a win for the town. It's a win for the taxpayers. I don't see anything negative about it. And again, what you said, George, earlier about they're not looking necessarily to double the size of the mall. They can't do that. They're first looking to simply take the space that's on that fourth floor that just has a wall, a sheetrock wall, take that wall down and use it as rentable space.
Mhm.
There's enough parking to accommodate whatever tenant usage there might be as per what the planning board would require. And again, as you said, anything and everything that they do would have to meet the scrutiny of Clarkstown's planning board. And it is a very, very tough planning board.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And you know yourself, having developed in the town as well. You know, we do have, I'm very proud of the fact that I think we have the best town planner in the region, and we certainly have a planning board and planning staff that are professional and take their job seriously. And we weigh the environmental impacts and effects, but it's a good, positive, positive opportunity here. So I think we're about out of time, but again, I want to thank you for your efforts with the Business and Economic Development Committee, your efforts as a local developer and really a philanthropist with a number of charities within the area. But thank you for bringing some clarity and some information on the referendum question. We're putting information out. There's a section on the town website that's gone up that has an FAQ, facts about the referendum. There'll be a town hall meeting during the month of October that will be focused simply on the mall. The town is doing a mailer just to remind people about this. And if people have questions, I would refer them to the FAQ and also to check out some of the information that's in the Business and Economic Development report, which is also linked on our website.
And if anyone has any questions for our committee, I certainly would be glad to address them.
Great. So would you want to give her contact information for that?
Maybe they can go through the town's website, and we can put that as one of the FAQs. And
sure.
Go
Happy
from there.
to. So we'll make sure that we have that listed, and there'll be folks in the Economic Development Committee that could also be available. But this is an important generational decision on the part of the people of Clarkstown. And in light of COVID, it's a decision that I certainly would favor. I think it's something that is smart from a business perspective. As a supervisor, you're looking for ratables, and you're looking for something that is going to help to stabilize and maintain your tax base. And anything that we can do to make sure that our big businesses and small businesses within the community are strengthened is only going to help our residences and the quality of life here. So Howard, again, thanks for being a great guest, and thank you for all of your efforts on behalf of the committee for the business community here in Clarkstown.
And I would just like to say, George, in closing, I had told people on the Business Economic Development Committee that I was going to be here today, and on behalf of the committee, they wanted to extend their thanks and hats off to you and the town council for the great job that you do for this town.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.